The box office numbers are in, and Ezra Miller's The Flash film absolutely bombed at the box office. It did even worse than the most anemic projections for the film leading up to its release. One analyst even claims that the film could lose up to or even more than $150 million. Before we get into the actual numbers that the film made, let's kind of give you a recap of what people were saying what their projections were for this film. We had box office tracking website Box Office Pro and its long range predictions that usually come out a month and a half before the film's actual release. So probably came out early May, middle of May. They predicted that the opening weekend would have between 115 million and 140 million. It didn't hit that at all. They would significantly reduce their predictions the closer the Flash got to release. On June 14th, they predicted the film would bring in between 60 million and 80 million, with a specific number of 69 million. Even after Thursday night previews for the film clocked in at 9.7 million, they still thought the film would bring in at least 60 million in its opening weekend. It didn't even do that, as we'll see a little bit later. So Box Office Pro wasn't the only one to totally miss the mark on The Flash. The Hollywood Reporter claims in May the film would have an opening weekend, quote, in the $70 million range. Deadline predicted on June 16th the film would have a $64 million 3-day opening weekend. Variety also predicted the film would have a $70 million opening weekend, albeit they noted that some insider analysts, they didn't name them, anonymous, I guess, expected it could go lower to 68 million or higher to 85 million. It didn't hit those numbers either. So this is what we actually saw here. According to the numbers, the film brought in an abysmal 55.1 million at domestic theaters. It did bring in another 75 million at the international box office for a global total of 130.1 million. So just to compare this to some other DCEU films, you'll see how just absolutely abysmal this is. The only films it did better than were Wonder Woman 1984, which was released day and date to HBO Max the same day it released in theaters at December of 2020, height of the COVID quote-unquote pandemic. That film had an opening weekend of 16.7 million. It also beat James Gunn's The Suicide Squad film, which came out a little around a year later. That had an opening weekend of 26.2 million, came out in 2021. Other films it beat were the recently released Shazam! Fury of the Gods. That had an opening weekend of 30.1 million. And then Birds of Prey, which came out right before the pandemic, had an opening of 33 million and didn't actually include the Birds of Prey characters whatsoever. Oracle was missing. I don't even know why you would call it that. But anyways, and then it also beat Shazam, which had an opening of 53.5 million. Obviously, factoring inflation there, Shazam does beat The Flash's 55.1 million. So just absolutely terrible, terrible opening weekend for Ezra Miller and The Flash. And then, as I said, one analyst, trustworthy analyst, OMB Reviews, he predicts that the film will actually have a $150 million plus loss. This is what he said in his breakdown. He said this film is going to be lucky to break 400 million, and it needs to make at least 550 million. That's if you're looking at 200 million production budget, which is what they have listed on the numbers. There's other estimates out there saying that it could be upwards of 300 million or more, given the fact that this film has been on the shelf for so long. And they clearly did a lot of reshoots, albeit it might be less given the fact that the visual effects were absolutely terrible in this film. But who's to say? Maybe they just paid a ton of money for really bad visual effects. But even if you look at a $200 million production budget, he's saying, quote, the film, quote, is looking at a $150 million plus loss for Warner Brothers, given the fact that it doesn't look like it's going to have any legs whatsoever. It has a really bad opening weekend. And it has a cinema score of a B, which is just really bad. And it just doesn't look like this film is going anywhere anytime soon, except into the graveyard. It's going 6 feet under. It's getting buried. And James Gunn is going to hope that when his Superman Legacy film comes out, no one is going to remember this absolute abysmal failure. But time will tell. Time will tell.